Hello everybody and good evening. Can you hear me all? I hope we are live. Yes, this was scheduled. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm not with Ben today. I'm in my own abode. And last time, of course, we had a few technical issues. So hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. I've got myself a dedicated line, so it's going to be uninterrupted. Hello! Excellent. I love being heard fine. So tonight, what we're going to do is have a look at some of the new features of Blender 2.8, and we're going to start off, as always, just downloading the latest version. Of course, nothing can go wrong using just the latest version that's just come out. So I'm going to switch across to my screen now. I'm going to keep myself in for the moment. Let's press the right button. There we go. And let's go ahead and load up. Well, we don't want Twitch. We want Blender.org. So how are you guys all doing? Are you doing fine? Have you been playing along with Blender 2.8? I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's been getting more and more stable as we go along. So I'm going to builder.blender.org/download. I'm going to go ahead and grab this latest version, which was made today. Not that long ago, actually, 4 hours or so ago, if that's my time. Anyway, so that'll take a few seconds to download, and once it's downloaded, I will go ahead and unzip it. My avatar looks disapprovingly in Discord. Well, that's great to know. Okay, so if you want to follow along and explore Blender 2.8 with me, do go ahead and grab yourself a copy of it, or just use the one you've got on there. Ah, there we go. Got my little talking head there as well, so you guys can see me as well. So let's go ahead. I'm going to extract this, and where shall I extract it? Let's extract it into my documents folder. I think that'd be a nice place to work with it today. Up we go, documents. There we go. So Blender 2.8 does seem to start really quickly with its extracting, and then it just tanks and disappears. It's going to prove me wrong this time. So have you been playing with Blender 2.8? Let me know if you've had any issues with Blender 2.8. It would be interesting to get your feedback because it's been pretty stable recently for me. But of course, I'm developing this environments course in Blender 2.8, and if you are having issues, it'd be great to iron some of those out, if we possibly can, before it actually starts and goes ahead. What we don't want, of course, is no one able to take it because it keeps crashing. Yes, I do think the layout does look very clean and nice. It's taken me a while to get used to it, and I've had to introduce some of my own shortcuts as well. You know what? I think you guys want to see a bigger version of me whilst that's installing. So yeah, Blender 2.8, it's missing some of the things. I'm so used to flipping into the camera view and whizzing around my scene just to set the camera up right for a shot. Unfortunately, that used to be just Shift and F, and they've turned that off for some reason. Now I've put that back on, but it won't be on here. So I'll show you guys how to set up your own shortcuts as well if things have changed slightly and you want to put it back to how you had it before, as much as possible anyway. Hey, jet lag mode. So Ben is here with me. Hopefully the stream will go well, since I do give him a bit of a ribbing for all the gear, and it's sometimes still not working very well. And then my stream didn't work very well the first time I tried it. So anyway, that aside, I'm almost done here with the install. So I'm going to switch across back to my talking head there, so you guys can see the screen. I'm going to go into my documents. I've got Blender 2.8, the latest version, just here. I'm going to open it up, and hopefully it will fill the right screen. Of course, you may get this coming up. Similarly on a Mac as well, you may get a similar warning. I'm going to run it anyway because I like to live dangerously, and I trust where I've got it from. Okay, so Blender 2.8 opens up. I've customized my scene a little. I got bored with a cube at the very beginning every time, and I'm sure you guys do too. And of course, you can customize your layout as much as you like, and well, I think I'll show you guys how to save that as well and how to back it up. There's nothing more infuriating if you've already got a setup and you want to make sure you move that across to a new computer. Say you work like me on a desktop and a laptop, or indeed you just want to upgrade your computer. Perhaps your computer's burnt out. Perhaps Blender's destroyed your computer by overheating it. Who knows? So I will go over that as well, because I've got a custom layout here and I can show you guys where that's all hidden. Hey, I'm just having a look over at the chat. Why use Blender 1.8? Well, I'm using Blender 2.8. I presume that's just a typo. Right now, it seems really bugging. So it is quite buggy in places. And cast my mind back maybe 6 weeks ago, I was worried that we couldn't really do much in it at the moment. But after about a couple of weeks had gone through, they'd sorted out a lot of the instability issues, and I've been able to work in it with just about as many crashes as I had in the normal Blender 2.79. So I'm not too concerned that it's unstable enough. I certainly wouldn't use it in a productivity workflow at the moment, and I certainly wouldn't open up. This is a big warning for you guys. Don't go and open up your Blender 2.79 files and press save. If you do that, you won't be able to reopen them. So if you do want to open up existing files and see what they look like with the Eevee rendering engine, or just to play around in it, make sure you take a copy of that file, or make sure you've got a backup. Well, you should always have a backup, but not all of us keep on top of them. But open up a copy of that file rather than worrying about, well, mucking up your setup. We don't want to do that. So in front of us here, one of the things that I've just configured, and I wonder if it's set there. No, it hasn't. So I used to fly around my scene. I used to hop into the camera mode to view whatever it is that's there. Let's go ahead and add something there. Let's add Suzanne so we can focus on her. So whenever you render with Blender, where you've placed the camera is quite important. That's going to be your final render when it comes out. And one of the things is I used to go Shift and F and I used to fly around, and it took me a while to find that again. It's under the View menu, under Navigation, so as if you're flying around, and not Fly. I don't like that one because it's got it smoothly comes in and out. Great if you're animating, not so much if you just want to move around your model, because you tend to overshoot quite a bit. So the walking animation, suddenly it becomes like a first-person shooter, and you can move in and out with W, A, S, and D and pan around your object really well. And now, of course, I can set it up, have a look what it's going to look like. If I switch over into rendered mode, we can see, perhaps that's the wrong side to even have the object, but you know, you can fly around. Now, I wanted to have that back as Shift and F. So the walk navigation, what you can do if you want any of these assigned to different shortcut keys, I can right-click on that and add myself a shortcut. That's incredibly useful, especially while they're still ironing out the features. I'm sure Shift and F will come back, but if it doesn't, of course, well, I want it back for the moment. So I'm going to add a shortcut. It says press a key. I'm going to go Shift and F, and there we go. Now I can hop in and do that whenever I want to. I can fly around my model. I say fly, it's really walking. And if I had a ground plane there, I could even turn on gravity and literally walk through a building if you had that modeled. Right, I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat before I show you guys how to go ahead and back up your system files for Blender, because they're hidden away, and there's a very quick way of getting there. Of course, I'm on a PC. It's slightly different on a Mac, but I will see if I can Team Viewer into my Mac. I think it's still on in the other room, and just show you how you'd go about doing that on the Mac as well. So, excellent. I'm glad Ben is safely back from San Francisco. He's had a lot of fun over at Udemy, and I'm sure he's come back with some awesome tips for us all as well. So, hi Michael, Eevee is quicker at rendering than Cycles. Yes and no. So Eevee is the new rendering engine in Blender. Yes, it is quicker, as we can see just here. Trying to render it out takes a few moments. I'm going to quickly go down here to the performance area and switch it to my GPU straight away. I don't really want to tax my CPU whilst I'm trying to stream on the same machine. That wouldn't be great. So if we move around our model, we can see, you know what, I'm going to turn the light up as well. It's silly having a lamp in our scene. And let's just rotate it around so the face of Suzanne is lit. There we go, almost. There we go, that's good. I'm going to use nodes here and set it to a value of 5 or something along those lines, so it's nice and lit up. Now, as we can see here, if you've got a really, or a decent system, maybe a GTX 1080 and above, or a Radeon RX 580 and above, something along those lines, you can get away with simple characters in your scene relatively easily, and cycles will still update quite quickly. As soon as you get a more complex scene, that's where you could, say for instance, prototype using Eevee, going backwards and forwards. In fact, there's another setting I want to change in a moment. So you can get to an end point and then switch into cycles if you need a realistic rendering. Last week we showed a great comparison, I'll go find it in a moment, between Eevee and between cycles. They were both pretty good, but cycles was much more accurate, and that is important in certain circumstances. However, Eevee is all about approximations, so it kind of gets most of the way there, and some of the stuff that I've done so far and that I've seen, really impressive. But like all things with artwork, it's sometimes a bit of smoke and mirrors to get most of the way there, especially if it's something you're looking at from a distance. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is, okay, let's save our startup file here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and save the startup file itself. And I'm going to go to File. Oh, no, it's moved. The user preferences now have moved under the Edit menu, like a lot of other programs. So I'm going to go to my interface and I'm going to rotate around selection, find that is on. And yeah, everything's set up how I would usually have it set up. So it's inherited some of those settings straight away from previous. So when it comes to exporting your settings, there are 4 different settings that you can export. You've got your user preferences, you've got your startup file. So now if we go ahead and go File New, it's going to ping back into how I had it saved before. I'm going to come out ever so slightly so we can see the entire scene and how it's set up. Let's move around to around here, and then I'm going to save it. So it's a bit more of a zoomed out looking down on our scene. So we're going to save our startup file. Now, contrary to where programs usually store it, I've been to my program files and I've been into loads of areas on the computer where you think it might be stored. No. It's stored in a hidden area on both Macs and PC. So what I'll do in a moment is I will go to there and then import it over on the Mac as well. Hopefully this will be completely flawless. So when it comes to exporting these, you need to go to a very specific location. On a Windows computer, the easiest way of getting there is to go on your Start button, type in Run, which will bring up the Run menu, and you can open up this little dialog box. You can also get there by the Windows key and R. That will also bring up this dialog box. From here, we can go % app data and % again. And once we've done that, it will open up a folder. Now, beware, you can break stuff in this folder. But all we need to do is go into Blender Foundation, Blender, and we'll see we've got 2.79 and 2.8 there. If we grab that 2.8 folder, that's the one we can copy to another machine, and then it will have, what were the 4 things? They were your startup file, your user preferences. When you are saving something, you have this system bookmarks area. That's also there. And there's a 4th one as well that skips my mind at the moment. But basically it's the root. It's what add-ons I think you've got turned on and which one's off. But moving add-ons across is a slightly different kettle of fish as well. So once we've gone ahead and we've got 2.8 open, I'm going to copy that and then I'm going to paste it, hopefully. I'm going to use a little remote desktop called TeamViewer. Oh, it's apparently already running, so let's open up that. And then I can nip across. Yes, my Mac Mini is on, well prepared. So let me just log in here. And hopefully we'll be able to paste that over and then open up Blender 2.8 on the Mac. But I'll show you where I'll need to show you anyway where that area actually is, because it's slightly different on a Mac. And this does take a while to log in. So whilst that's logging in, I'm going to have a look over on the questions. Yes, remember, if you have a question and you're a sub, do put that question mark in first so that it's easy for me to see in the chat. Thanks there, Ben. But do I do any coding? Rudimentary coding at the moment. I'm focused mainly on Python because it's, well, it's what Blender's driven by in the background. So hopefully with the remaster of the Blender course, the Master Blender course at the moment, the Complete Blender Creator over on Udemy, when it comes to the 2.8, what I'd like to do in that is actually introduce some more Python-esque, well, some coding in there itself, so we can drive Python to do our bidding. Drive Python, drive Blender to do our bidding using Python. Get my words mixed up there. Can we switch from Eevee and cycles with materials and or textures? Yes, we can. That's the really great thing about it. Now, there is a caveat there that the lighting and material setup will need tweaking. But what you can do is set up separate nodes, basically. So one output represents Eevee and one output represents cycles. But in general, you will only be outputting to one of those. It'd be very rare that your end goal will be to have both. Okay, that was very successful. I'm just going to try that once more. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, I will not be able to show you the further bit on the Mac. Perhaps we can sort that out another day. I'm going to leave that there, opening up in the background. Okay, so one of the great things you brought up there in the chat is switching between Eevee and cycles. So let's go ahead and make up a very simple, let's use Suzanne. I'm happy using Suzanne. And let's create something with her. And they've changed the node editor ever so slightly. It's no longer called the node editor, it's called the shader editor. So I'm going to open up another window. The splitter widget has gone, but you can still go to the top corner of the window. And once we've done that, we can switch the editor type over to the shader editor. Now this selected object, which is Suzanne, doesn't have a material. I'm going to add a new material whilst we're here, and I'm going to zoom in so this is nice and big and just manipulate my screen around so you guys can see it. We have this new shader, the principled shader, the God shader, or whatever you want to call it. It is a more physically accurate shader. Not always do you have to use it. Sometimes it will slow down rendering using it. But if you're going for more of a physically accurate rendering, then you will actually want to use the principal shader because it saves you a load of faff setting up nodes here, there and everywhere. But don't shy away from using those other nodes because sometimes... No, that's not working. There we go. So I can't show you the Mac today, guys. Sorry, I just can't log in for whatever reason. So the principal shader is a wonderful shader. I've sometimes fallen back on the other shaders just to make sure that things are working as I'd expect them to. And because Blender 2.8 is a little buggy around the edges, sometimes faffing around in Eevee will cause Blender to crash. Sometimes just switching over to cycles, we see that the materials haven't actually changed. And we see on the material output itself, if we zoom in a bit more over here, the material output has Eevee, cycles and all. So it can display both. Now, occasionally it does come out black over in the viewport if you try that, and sometimes it's just a matter of going into the material and flicking these backwards and forwards. But if it's set to all, that means that when we switch between rendering engines, and we can do that now, so we've got Suzanne lit here in cycles. If I switch that across to Eevee, we can see that it is also lit there. Now, if this material output was only set to cycles, we wouldn't get the material showing in our or on our model. I'm going to set it back to all for the moment, and I'm going to leave it set in Eevee unless we get a crash. I'm going to save this for the moment. I'm just going to, I'll save it in here, and I'll call it, what should I call it? I'll just call it monkey test for the moment. Why not? Not that I condone animal testing. This is a test with Suzanne. She has accepted liability for Blender crashing on me if it does. Yes, the one shader to rule them all. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add myself a texture to this, just a generated texture. So I'm going to add in an input. Now, I'd usually use something called the node wrangler. Let's see if it's working. So edit, user preferences, add-ons. I'm going to type up here wrangler, W-R, so it's there. Have they fixed it so it doesn't crash yet? No, they haven't fixed that yet. So that add-on doesn't currently work, unfortunately. So we've got to set it up manually. But that's okay, because if we're setting up something manually, at least we've got full control over it. So let's adjust the base color of our model. Let's go in and add in an input. And we need to tell Blender how the coordinates, how we're going to map a 2D image to a 3D model. So that's the first texture that or the first node that we're going to add in. we can have a mapping node in between to adjust that texture further. I'm going to not use that in this case. I'm going to leave it out. And then I'm going to add in the texture itself. So let's go add, and I'm going to search for texture. We get texture image coming up. Oh, texture. Or image texture, there we go. And so we can plug in a texture coordinate into the vector and then a color coming out. So, oh, no, I don't want a texture image. I wanted something generated. Silly me. So let's go in here and pick textures. What should we pick? A Musgrave texture. There we go. So we can plug that in here. I'm going to go into rendered mode, which I am. Dismiss the tools for the moment. So we've got kind of a camo effect. I can change the scale on that. And I can even change the color on it if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave it like that for the moment. So we've got this black and white Suzanne there. In fact, I am going to add a color. I'm going to go into a color ramp, which I think is under vector, if I remember. No, where is it? Okay, I'm so used to using the search, I can't remember where things are placed anymore. And I'm going to set the dark color to be a green and the light color to be a brown. So proper camo here. So node 1. Yeah, I'll leave it like that for the moment. You get the idea of what we're doing here. We're coloring it in. Now we can have a generated vector. Changes it ever so slightly. Object sometimes works really well if you haven't unwrapped your object. But I believe when we set up, and by default now, all the objects, all the primitives, where you go ahead and add them, there's an option in the operator panel to generate UVs for us. And that can be incredibly useful if we want to get on and texture something. However, obviously, if you're creating your own model, UV unwrapping is typically the way to go. But if you're feeling lazy for whatever reason, then I would suggest using object or generated and seeing how you get on. It might get you most of the way there that you need for the moment. I'm just going to read the messages over here for the moment. Does Blender crash more often than the other option? Yes and no, and yes and no. All programs will eventually crash if you try and do things in them. It's just the nature of computing. Something goes wrong, it doesn't like it, and it crashes. Is Maya more stable than Blender? Well, I've seen Maya crash. I've seen Word crash. You know, I've seen every program under the sun crash. So, is it more stable? Some of that is just dependent on someone's system. You can have instabilities, especially when using Blender, because it really does tax the system. It will use all the memory it possibly can. It will use all your CPU. It will use all your GPU, and it will just tax your system. So if you've not got adequate cooling, sometimes things can crash because they overheat. Your whole computer can melt. I've seen laptops that have died because of 3D rendering videos. It just really taxes the system. So that's something to bear in mind if you're thinking about maybe a new computer, you're really liking Blender, you want to get into it more. Make sure you've got adequate cooling. Now, it will depend, of course, where you are in the world as well. Someone who lives where the ambient temperature in their garage where they do their work and everything is 10 degrees and they're happy working like that, you're going to have a much cooler computer than if you're in a 40-degree environment, even if it's the same computer. So it's worthwhile bearing that in mind. So we have our texture just set up here. I am tempted to put in some more details, but I won't bother for the moment. But what I will do now is just switch to cycles. And boom, it's there straight away. So it does work and move across without any issues. However, what I do want to show you here is the difference between using cycles on a slightly more involved environment. So I need to go to a certain location and I've forgotten where it is. So I'm going to whiz through here. I think it's under ideas. Now, if you tuned in last week, you would have seen this as well. I think it's texture experiment. Staircase. I think it might have been staircase. Nope, not that one. I might have to go and find the images. Oh, actually, under here, under Blender, this is a tip for you, and I wish I thought about it before rambling through. You can turn on at the very top of your file manager, you can turn on these 4 buttons which give you a little preview of the stuff that you're working on. And I don't think it's any of those. So diffuse, no, it's not in there. Understanding textures. I can't remember where I've put it, you know. Never mind. But with a more detailed scene, it does make a difference. I think I can go and get it by going into our folders themselves. Section 1, environments, ideas. I'm sure I've rendered it out in here. Yes, here we go. So we've got this image here. Now, this one and this one were made, and just the toggle between Blender and Eevee was just switched backwards and forwards. So when we go to this one cycles, and we can see that the lights coming from the or bouncing off of those lights at the very top, hitting this wall and hitting this wall here, it's a much more accurate. By default, it putting all the shadows underneath the stairs properly. Sort of, I suppose, real ambient occlusion. It's been occluded from the light. The only light source in this scene are the lamps you can see. Now, when I did the same thing in Eevee, you'll notice that the reflections are off. They're not quite right. I didn't realise that these stairs, even though I had all these shadow options turned on, shadows are sometimes controlled by the light source themselves. So that's something to bear in mind, that when you're with the Eevee engine, there's a bit more setup involved. Cycles just works, but it takes longer to render. Eevee, you have to deliberately set up. You have to turn things on. I really want to find this for the moment. So, oh, it might have been one of these two. Let me just open it up and have a quick look and see. No, it's not that one. Is it simple scene? No, it's not that one either. Okay, worthwhile checking and just seeing. Whilst we're here, let's have a look at the questions. What have we got going on here? So, does Blender crash more often? I hope I've answered your question there. I've had Blender crash on me. I've had all programs crash on me. The stable versions. Oh, the stable versions. So, no, they're pretty stable, unless you turn on experimental features. So one of the great things with cycles, which isn't supported in Eevee yet, is this experimental feature set, which enables you to do basically tessellation, real-time displacement of a surface. And if you're doing that, that allows you to add much more detail into your scene. And literally, this plane here could be a mountain range. You don't have to do anything else. But it's difficult to see it in the preview window. You keep having to toggle backwards and forwards, and it can cause Blender to crash on you. The 2.8, will I go with if you're doing production work? Yes. 2.8, I would not do anything production-wise. I'd use it as your playground for the moment, so that you can really learn the new interface. That's really important, because you're about to go from... It's not too different, but there are things in different places. Like the tool shelf here does change depending on what you're trying to do at the time. Oh, annotate. That's new. Does that mean I can... Yes! Literally, from the last download that I used, I was thinking about using the grease pencil, and they've got it working. It's now called annotate, and if we click and hold on that, it gives us an option to draw lines. Excellent. Oh, that's made me so happy that they finally got the grease pencil in. If I hold down D, does it activate automatically? Yes, that's made me really, really happy. If you do play with the grease pencil, it's great for demonstrating things. You can turn it off under the sidebar, it's called now. If we scroll down, no, why can we not? Are we in edit mode or something along those lines? Okay, they've hidden where the grease pencil, you turn it on and off. Okay, well, I'm just going to revert the file for the moment. There we go, so we can look at it again. So 2.8, great playground, and it's good to get going and start practicing in any new program, because what you don't want to do is suddenly come up, you know, how do I use this? So starting to play now, and that's ultimately why we started doing the environments course in 2.8. Despite it not being quite there in terms of its stability, it has got a great rapid prototyping feature called Eevee, where we can actually set up our scenes really quickly and actually get them dynamically evolving. That's what we did last week. We were playing with a gravestone that we had the moss growing on it as well. So have we got any other questions in the chat at the moment? Do reach out and ask them if you've got any. I'm just reading down it here. Yes, 2.8 is alpha. I wouldn't use it for production. Okay, thanks, Ben. I'll check my messages in a moment. Yes, the awesome preview of the files. I keep forgetting it's there. Just to remind you guys, or if anybody's just tuned in Blender, where you're having a look at your files, there are a couple of icons. You can reveal more details so you know when you've worked on it, or indeed you can go ahead and view the files themselves. Now, some of these aren't... you see this bridge in fog? The reason why it's blank like that, and probably the other one is the same. Yes, I'm pretty sure that the other one is the same purely because it has a domain in it with a bit of fog in it. So I'm going to open up Bridge in Fog at the moment and show you guys a couple of things. See, what we've got here is a big block, and it doesn't show up in the renders because when we go into rendered mode, you can see it's putting all the things together, it's stepping through. We've got this sort of foggy appearance, and that is caused by this big block. This big block is a volumetric block, and you have to basically tell Blender, I want fog, essentially, in this area. And you can control that fog with a texture, so you can end up with it having denser patches and lighter patches as well. I haven't played too much with that for the moment, but this is one of the scenes that I've been working on for the new environments course. It only takes a few minutes once you know what you're doing to put together a scene like this. Now, this is a great example of where you switch over to cycles and then you end up twiddling your thumbs for a bit to get an accurate idea of what the image is. So we're almost there now, and well, that's 32 samples. So that's taken around 7 seconds to do, but with Eevee, boom, we're there, done. And we can pull around very quickly and move around our scene. That is even more critical when you're trying to set things up. You can just, well, I'm going to do it. You can just imagine trying to set up this scene, let's say a bit further down, closer to the boat, let's say like that. But if we were doing that in cycles, I've got to wait for it to render a little bit before I try. Oh, it's gone all, I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore. It's gone so grainy. Now, just for reference, my graphics card, I presume I'm using my graphics card here. I'll just check. Yes. My graphics card's a GTX 1080, so it's no slouch, but it still takes time, especially if you start adding things like volumetrics into our scene. Ah, yes, clipping. If you do spot any clips, or you do spot any good tips as we go along, do clip them so that others can see snippets of what goes on in these sort of hour-long sessions or so. So the grease pencil, that's a great question. I'm going to open up a new Blender file for the moment. So a grease pencil is good for making notes. It's great for instructing. So if I want to sort of say to you, well, I want this area here to be darker than this area here, and I want a harsh shadow running down Suzanne's face. That was really easy to just draw directly on my model. Now, it would have drawn it relative to the view, so not over the model, although there is an option to draw on the model, or there was in a previous version. Where it's hidden now, I haven't discovered it yet because it's brand new. But this is great for demonstrating an idea where you want to go. But the grease pencil can also be used to do 2D animation. You just have to have a look on the Blender website when we go into features and go down to, oh, is it actually in the feature set here? I was looking at it earlier. Ooh. I'm not quite sure where it's hidden away. I was looking at it earlier under, I think, the Blender 2.8 blog rather than in here. I'm not sure where it is, but on the Blender website itself, there is an option to have, there's a series of demonstrations of how you can use it for 2D animation, because just like anything else in Blender, it can be animated. This is a series of nodes, basically like a curve, and then you can animate that and basically do 2D animation. So soon, Blender might be a good platform for making 2D sprites for your games as well. So that's something else that we could have a look at on its development. Now, the grease pencil has only just been introduced, so I probably wouldn't introduce it into any course anytime soon, but I'd certainly play with it as it develops and see where we can go with that. Yes, the grease pencil, once it's actually developed and fully there, I think it's going to open up Blender to do many more things with it, and enable you to introduce 2D elements and 2D graphics into a 3D scene as well. It's amazing what you can do with the grease pencil. Is there any info about how big and in-depth the new environment course will be? Because I'm so hyped for it. I'm really hyped for it as well. The plan at the moment is the early access people, the lifetime members, will be getting access to the course within the next week or so. I'm not quite sure on the launch that Lucy's going to send out to the lifetime backers. I think it's going to be early next week. It might be before, I don't know. Then we're going to send it out to our MailChimp list so they can join in as well later on in where are we? Or towards the end of August, and then it's going to be on a general release towards the end of September. And of course, that's the great thing about being a lifetime backer. Whenever we run our Kickstarters, you can actually join in, become a lifetime member, you get early access, and you get to have a real good steering in how our courses are developed. Are you talking about this tweet? Let's open it up. Ba-da-bum. Yes, the new grease pencil. Woo! I watched that earlier. I love this guy. Sometimes I find it a bit hard to understand him. I'm not going to play it here, obviously. You guys can go off and follow that yourself. Yes, but the actual grease pencil being in there, that's what I saw earlier. But I didn't see it on Twitter. I saw it through other channels. Can't remember. You know, everything Blender news. Very easy to get confused of where you've got it from. Okay, guys. I'd love to know if you guys have any specific questions. I'm open for a couple of questions about Blender 2.8 or Blender in general. Hit me up in the comments below or below on the side, wherever your stream chat is. Now, you may notice I've not got the stream chat on the screen at the moment. I want as much real estate in Blender as I can. Whilst we've got the questions coming in, if you do have any, I want to show you a couple of other things that I've discovered as I've been going around. Collections now work properly. Now, collections are kind of the new layers, the new way of grouping things together. So if Suzanne here was sat on a pedestal, so let's go ahead and give her a pedestal. So let's add a cylinder here, scale it up. There we go. That will do for the moment to, I don't know, indicate some sort of plinth that she was sat on. If I select them both and press the M key, for Mike, we can move to a collection, and I can create a new collection here and call it, I don't know, display. And then once I click OK, we've got a new collection over on the side. So it's a new way, a new paradigm of organizing your things within Blender. And one of the things that it does do now, which it didn't do if you just created a hierarchy of parents, which was one way of managing this before. You'd create maybe an empty called display, and then you would parent everything to, you know, here we did parent, oh, what's her face? Suzanne and this cylinder to a parent called display. Now at least we can turn them both off very quickly. Now there are some options as well. When we right click on here, we've got some other options to do with these collections. So it's great that we can then duplicate this collection. No end of times would I come across issues with trying to duplicate things. And then if I turn off this other collection, oh, is that a duplicate or is it a linked duplicate? Oh, interesting. I've not actually played with this. Ooh. Let's see if there are any questions. It's nice when the yeah, okay, I'm glad you enjoy that. I think if you guys are watching, I had an issue the other week. I was watching Ben in his stream, and I was watching on my iPad, and it was actually very difficult to see what he was typing at the time and seeing my chat and the chat, so it was quite difficult to see. I've given the feedback to Ben as well. I think we're going to move the stream chat off the screen in general so that we can really focus on the content that we're delivering. I'll be interested to know whether my thing in the lower corner, I'm doing this, of course, I'm in the corner, if that's covered up anything as well. I've tried to position it, I think, where it's not going to interrupt too much. I'm not doing anything with the timeline at the moment, so if I was, I would switch back to just a screen only. But I think me in the corner there, bit of personal connection as well. Do you think I'm too small, too big, just right? And I'm not talking about my weight, okay? I'm working on that. Okay. Do they get moved together if you move the collection like Empties does? I do believe so. As we just saw there with the display, can I actually select them all? So can I select the objects within there? So right clicking on that collection, select objects, and then we can move it over here. Now, interestingly, it looks like when I duplicated that, it's exactly the same thing. So it's not duplicated the items in there. However, what I will do is I will delete that collection. We do seem to have... this is interesting. So they're now part of a collection and not, and they're the same object. This leads me to believe that perhaps objects can be part of multiple collections, more like a tag rather than a parent. So that's worthwhile knowing that objects can exist in more than one place. I guess I can drag that into collection 1 as well. Yes, so they can exist in multiple places. That's quite useful to know. Okay, so what I could have done here is right-clicked on display, selected the objects, and maybe done a Shift-D to duplicate it. So that's a much quicker workflow. If you've got a collection that happens to be something with 500 parts in it, that's going to be much quicker to do than trying to border select your object to make sure you haven't got a different mesh object selected, or hiding other parts of your scene. That in itself is going to pay dividends. And as you can see here, I'm not quite sure how we go about. Can we remove things from a collection just by right clicking on it? Unlink, is that the word that we're looking for? Unlink? Yes. So unlinking it removes it from a collection by the looks of it. And then we can link things together if we wanted to later on. So I can select these two here, and oh, I don't want to apply anything. I want to go M, new collection. I'm going to call this one Monkey. And then we should have a new collection over here called Monkey. Brilliant. And we've got this cylinder here on its own. If I unlink, yes, it disappears out of here. So you can have... Oh, I could see that being confusing if you didn't manage your projects well, because it can be... Well, they're badly named as it is, but it could be difficult if you've got multiple things in multiple places after having the paradigm that one thing is one thing alone. The other thing to note is the outline has changed just a little bit. We can actually change and search much better than we could previously. So we've got these other filter options here. I'm not sure how much of this existed in 2.79, but I have found it very useful. I was working on a scene the other day that had... Oh, have I still got it available? Yes, it's called Castle. I just need to find it. This was a really good challenge I set myself. I decided not to do anything to do with modeling, just a cube and transforming that cube to see what I could come up with. And I even challenged some of the people over on the Facebook group. If you're part of our Facebook group, you would have seen that, and you might have even been one of the people that joined in. So I just need to remember where I've saved it. Okay, give me 2 seconds. And this is a great idea if you've got your system bookmarks. What we can do is add... Here we go, getting started, castle. So this castle here was made with just cubes. They're all the same cube. If we have a look at the mesh data, scroll up here, it's called cube, and there are 159 users of that cube. And if we look at all the other options in here, there's cube 001 and cube 002. So there are a few where I've obviously missed the linked duplicate. But you can see here, actually, the last thing I looked for was lamp. I love lamp. So because I'm ashamed to show you this, because I was just moving cubes about, we literally have 160, 70 odd cubes. It'd have been great to put those all in some sort of hierarchy, but you could imagine here you're scrolling down. Well, I say 100 and something cubes. There are quite a few cubes here. We're up in 300 already. So you can see how that was quite a pain in the backside. And I could have quite easily missed these 3 lamps if I was scrolling quickly. So just by searching lamp at the top here, I got my 3 lamps in. And then when I decided to light my scene, I went for a bit of a different 3-point light setup. Blue and orange complementary colours go together really well. And we've got a sort of a backlight here just filling in some of the shadows so it's not too dark. And then my final render kind of looked like that. Now, I would really recommend setting yourself time limits. That's one of the things as an artist or a coder or working on anything. We all want something to be the best that we can make it. But in reality, we always run into issues where you have time constraints. There's always going to be a deadline to meet, whether or not it's you've got lunch to go to, you've got to go to bed, or your project's got to be in a week's time or a day's time or an hour's time. So when I do projects like this, I deliberately set myself a time limit. In this case, it was of 1 hour. Play about as much as I like, but in 1 hour, I have to have something at the end of it that I'd be proud to show. So, of course, I could have gone off and modelled a whole castle, and then it looked not as great as just this front piece could. By the way, I'm just disappearing for the moment. I'm going to talk louder. I almost knocked it off the desk then. This is what I was modelling it upon. So Lego and low poly come together really well. So I stole some of my daughter's Lego. Don't tell her, she's not here at the moment, so it's fine. So a little castle like this, I decided, and this is a great tip as well, what are the key features of an object like this that you want to represent on your models? Now, we could try and model these torches, the flames, all the little details here, But ultimately, I didn't have the time to model all of this as it is. I decided to go for more of a representation of how things are laid out on the screen, as you can see here, so that we get, I would say, 80% of the way there. It's sort of the 80-20 principle. What we don't want is to get just a portcullis there, or get halfway through it and not really end up with an end product. So that's one thing I would always say to you. Set yourself goals that are achievable within a small time frame. Okay, we've got some questions coming in. Do they get moved together like empties do? No, I think it looks like they're more tags. Unless you go and right-click and selected objects underneath that tag, as it were, that collection, then they're not going to move together. So you may still have to use parenting if you want things to move together when you drag them around. So we've got a couple of questions here, so let's go through them. So I've been doing Blender for a while now, and I find myself YouTubing tutorial for something I want to create. I fear that severely lacking imagination needed for a 3D artist. How do you... Yes, it is difficult when you're sitting down and you're trying to... We all do it. We want to create something unique. And Blender Guru, he's got some great tutorials out there. And whenever you're on a Blender group, you get the infamous donut. If you've done Blender at all, you know that donut. And what I would say to you is start with that donut. One of the great things about being an artist is you can do what you want and you can develop things. So listen to the tutorial, whosever it is, follow along, and then think about, what have I learnt here? What can I apply this to? How can I make this into a bigger or better scene? Could I take the plate and put it on a table and then make an entire kitchen scene? You know, these things are they build upon one another. But one of the things I would say, especially if you want to get noticed, is if you're following along with the tutorial, don't just copy it. Make it your own. Take ownership over it. And I do inspire people on my courses to do just that. In fact, I deliberately set out to give people a bit more of a woolly challenge, so it prods them in the right direction to begin with. I give them lots of options, give them the tools to do the work, and then give them a bit of freedom as well. So you guys, when you have a bit more freedom, it's wonderful what you come up with. And I know that some of us require a bit more of a prod to be more imaginative than others. Some people are just naturally gifted with it. Now, don't worry if you feel that you're not naturally gifted with it. It's just practice. Just practice and practice and practice, and work on smaller projects. Everybody wants to make a Ferrari, or wants to make a jet plane, or wants to model something that someone's taken 10 years to perfect their skills to do. You're not going to achieve that. Step it back a little and just work on smaller projects. Instead of trying to model this entire desk in front of me, I wouldn't do that. I would model something on my desk. Maybe this little thing, or, as I've done, my Lego over here. So make your projects a bit smaller, a bit more achievable, preferably within, you know, I don't know, grades of 20 minutes or so. Have you got 20 minutes to spare? Yes. What can you realistically do in 20 minutes? What can push you in 20 minutes? See if you can do it in that time. If you don't achieve it, what have you learned from that? What would you do different next time? By all means, try the same thing again, or try a different model, but actually use the knowledge you've learnt and put it across. So you were hoping it was more like a tag to group things, move base. Yes, so it does look like it's like that. So we've got JFrog here asking a question. Hello, Michael, I need some help. I'm trying to learn your Blender lesson and the Unity lesson by Ben at the same time. The reason why I'm trying to learn both is both is to try and not get frustrated and lose interest in Unity. Okay, so it seems that programming is much harder than 3D modeling. Well, yes and no. It depends on your background. You know, if you've got a heavy science background and you've done coding before, then it's going to be easier to do coding. And I can see there you're already fluent in Adobe Premiere and Photoshop, so you've got more of an artistic background to you. So some of the tools, even though they're not exactly the same, they're going to be very, very similar regardless. So you've got more of an artistic background there, so coding's going to be different. That's all. And again, it comes down to practice. Put yourself aside a few minutes every day to do some coding. That's all it takes. If it's one lecture a day, don't try and race through an entire course. I'd never recommend doing that. Unless you were really, really proficient and you wanted to pick up a couple of tips, I would certainly take things methodically, and just like I've said with the modeling here, keep the goals you want to do achievable. So I've been through the Unity courses myself and the Unreal course, and I would constantly, going back to am I a coder question above, let's make me a bit bigger so you're just not looking at that screen. So I would take that knowledge that I'd learnt in that section and I'd actually push myself. And it was a bit annoying that I would go off on a bit of a tangent away from how the course was going, but I was learning a lot. And what I really learnt was when I went on to the next lesson, I had deviated slightly, but how could I make my deviation work within the scope of the course? And that really, really made my brain hurt, but it also improved my coding no end. The same's true with modeling and any other skill. Push yourself and just keep realistic about it. As a beginner, it's going to be very difficult to model ultra-realistic things, but don't try and do ultra-realistic things. Build up to that skill over time. How can you keep focused? Well, keep small chunks. It's much easier to stay focused for 20 minutes, 40 minutes at a push, and then by the end of the hour, you should really be getting up and walking away, which I will be doing soon. We're on about 10 minutes left. So if you have got any questions, do give me a shout. Yes, we've also got a, thank you for mentioning that, Bahindi. We've got a course on finishing, how you can put motivational techniques into action and actually finish something. And as an artist myself, well, we all know that our work is never actually complete. I'm going to just quickly show my model back here again. I'm looking at this at the moment and thinking, excellent, that took an hour. I now want to make the rest of the castle to go along with it. Or I want to start improving it slightly and making the bricks a bit more textured, or even putting in that drawbridge there. But also being disciplined and remembering that, am I going to learn anything about that? Is it going to add to this overall challenge that I've set myself? It would be far better for me to take all the knowledge I've learned from this and reapply it to a new model, so there are new challenges to overcome as well. Because I can guarantee if I try to make let's say the 4 walls for the rest of the castle and maybe a bit going up, it would be very repetitive. So I'd certainly hone some of my skills. But since most of the skills used in this are simply, they're all transforms essentially. It's the same brick rotated and moved and scaled. That's it. This whole thing is the same brick, give or take. And so it does mean that if I change one of them and apply the transform, I could completely wreck my model. So I'm not going to do that. Well, actually, let's do it. Let's scale this up slightly and then apply the transform to the scale. Okay, no, I can't do that. I'd have to faff around. I thought I could make it look all funny all of a sudden, but I'm not going to do that. Do I like Ligma? You're going to have to tell me what Ligma is. I'm not familiar with it. By the way, your teeth are amazing. Hi. I presume you mean my teeth. They're the ones I was born with. A motivational. Yes, that's absolutely fine. If I say something that's profound and intelligent, well, that's not always going to happen. Sometimes I can mumble around and be a bit of a buffoon, but I do come out with some nuggets of gold occasionally. So if you want to clip them and share them with your friends, I'm more than happy for you guys to do that. Anything that's here, please do share with people. We want people to join us in with our community and actually contribute back as well. So backwards and forwards, building a community where we can all get together. And because obviously I'm more Blender focused, but we're also as a team focused on game development. You guys are developing wonderful games. You want to develop your artistic skills along with that. The more people we've got in the pot, so to speak, the more varied and variety is the spice of life after all. So if we can get to a point where we've got loads more questions coming in, that's great, because that means I can give you guys even more value, because you guys are going to ask better questions than I can think of. Oh, it'd be really cool if you guys saw this. where actually you've got this burning question. So we've got about 5 minutes left of the stream. If you have any questions at the moment, please do type them. I'm going to take two more. I'm going to take two more questions as we go through here. Aha, and just as I've said that, a question has come up. I have a question about something. Hopefully it clarifies later on. Whenever I make a scene in Blender, I feel like I'm using smooth shading and edge split on almost every mesh. Is this right to do? Okay, so oh, if you did ask that before, sorry, I did miss it. I try and focus on that a few times, and then I'm deep focused on the screen over here. So if you're using smooth shading and edge split, I presume you mean the edge split modifier and not applying that, I would say that it depends what you're doing. It's as simple as that. So if we have another look at our scene over here. Now the edge split modifier, if you don't know, is a way of splitting up your mesh, basically. So if we got Suzanne the monkey here, we go to our modifiers. I hope this modifier works in 2.8. Edge split. So it's under the generate column, which means it's generating additional geometry. Now before we do this, if we select Suzanne, we can see that she has no verts, no faces, no triangles. Great. If I go into edit mode, does it show them? Yes, it does. Okay, so she's got, basically she's one large mesh at the moment. If we were to move her about, she would. By turning on, let's say, smooth, so let's turn on smooth. It's under object now, under shade smooth, so they've changed the name of that. So we get a much smoother shading across the model. Oh, that looks a lot better than previously. They've certainly improved that. Oh, I've run out of zoom, by the way. If you ever run out of zoom in Blender itself, you can go in to view and frame select, and if you've got a number pad full stop, you can, or period key, you can go ahead and press that, and then you get your zoom back again. So applying the edge split here should make everything quite angular again, and then you can change the edge split angle. Now this is often used in hard surface modeling. So to follow on with your question there, is that what you're doing? Are you modeling robots and things that do have a hard, sharp edge to them? If you're not, then perhaps it's not the right thing to do. It does depend on what you're trying to achieve at the end of it. Because smooth shading, great. I'd recommend turning that on most of the time. Edge split will give you this low poly look. Is it right to do? Well, yes, if that's what you're doing. If we're trying to do something else, then maybe not. With the edge split modifier, by the way, the other thing that turning on smooth shading and edge split does, and we explore it in the chess set in the main Blender course, the Complete Blender Creator, is non-planar geometry. So what you can end up with is faces, even though they're all quads in this case, they're all four-sided. So let's go to face select. So all of these are built up of four-sided faces or quads, but they're not. Some of them are non-planar. In fact, this one is non-planar, and what that can lead to is when the mesh is eventually triangulated for rendering, you can end up with harsh triangulated edges. And I've seen this in games as well, where you've got a wall and it's non-planar, and you end up with a diagonal line going across it where it's reflecting light slightly differently, and it looks horrible. And the reason for that is because smooth shading isn't turned on. But if you turn on smooth shading without the edge split turned on, in fact a cube would be a much better example. So a cube here, if we turn on smooth shading, let's come out of here, object, shade smooth, it looks really odd around its edges. However, if we turn on the edge split, it looks like a cube again. There is an auto smooth option as well. That I think, oh, I've forgotten where that is. I think that's under, it's under normal somewhere. Auto smooth. Here we go. So under your mesh data settings, let's test this out. Thank you for bringing that up. I was reading about it the other day as well. So under the mesh data tab, if we go down to auto smooth, there we go. So yes, this is one of the settings when you're exporting to the Unreal Engine that you'll want to set, because I think this one comes across, and it's one of the warnings that when you import a model, an FBX, over into the Unreal game engine, it does ask about your normals and the auto smoothing. So I think that's going to be quite important. We can see if we raise that above 90, which all of these faces are at 90 degrees, it's going to make it all smooth again. But yes, as always, there's more than one way of doing something over in Blender. Okay, got this down here. full Blender course. Thank you for linking that in there. Okay, I brought this course. Does it actually cover all of Blender? Yeah, but all of Blender, it would be a huge topic. But yes, it does delve into almost everything Blender can offer. We start off with your basic modeling. In fact, why don't I just bring up the course right here and show you and talk through it on here. So courses, Blender course. I'm going to go straight to the curriculum so you guys can see almost the back end of how it's all put together. So we start off with introducing you to the interface, and we've had positive feedback on that and negative feedback. Some people want to dive in straight with modeling. Other people then get in a complete mess with the layout and they need hand holding through that. So it's always a bit of both. But I think what I'm going to do with the Blender 2.8 remaster of this course is to include a bit more modeling early on. So we start off by basically sorting out, you know, saying, hello, how you doing? This is the community. This is Blender. This is where you get it from. Excuse me. I'm going to have a sip of water. I've been chatting. Okay, so we start off by introducing you to us basically, and then setting you up in Blender, making sure you can operate it and it's working well on your computer. We make a very simple model to begin with. After we've done that, and if you look down here, we try and make sure the lectures are named like tools, but we build up a project as we go. Then we do a bowling pool, a ball and pins, and I introduced something at the very end of that. I had some fun with physics, where at the very end of the video we end up putting two ramps together and letting the bowling ball that we've created collide with those pins, and that was a great. I'm seeing so many shares of that now. That's something that a lot of people find fun. Then we make a low poly chess set, and that teaches you basic block modeling. From there we move on, and as you can see, it's a very in-depth course. Animated lamps, so we cover the basics of animation. We have got a separate character animation course which specifically deals with skeletal rigs that work in game engines, because there are certain things that you need to do when you're doing those type of skeletal rigs and exporting. The Fluffy Bunny, despite its cute name, is all about particle systems and a bit of sculpting. And then after that, so you can see that's quite a big pack, we've got the game asset pack. This is all about being modular in design, being able to put all of your projects together and then exporting into Unity and Unreal. So does this cover everything in Blender? No, but it covers a lot. The human head is more realistic rendering. We deal a lot with subsurface scattering. In fact, I would still recommend the subsurface scattering node setup that we have in the human head, rather than the one that's just presented with the principal shader by itself. You actually have a lot more control. So this does have a subsurface input to it, but I'd still recommend currently to use the setup if you want a more realistic, where there are multiple layers of the skin where light's coming through. I think you're going to get a much better output. But again, that's it depends on what your end goal is. If you're going for ultra realistic, then having a complex node setup, a unique node setup, is going to be much better. From the human head also deals with proper mesh topology, how we have edges and face loops naturally within our face, modeling and following the muscle groups. So we've got advanced materials, topology, how we're going about modeling, and also a bit of sculpting in there too. Then we've got a couple of bonus sections which are really short and compact sections. We've got destruction, where we blow things apart. We've got a tank busting through a wall, and then we've got VFX and CGI. So we start with a real video, and I think it's a jet, we use an F-22 jet flying in there, and then of course it's 52 hours odd into the course and it's time to wrap it up. Unfortunately, most people who buy the course with good intention, obviously, to take it, get waylaid, or they start it and they get all the bits they need. If you're doing game development, it's less likely that you're going to need these bonus sections towards the end, apart from you can with Collada Export. I know with Unity and with Destruction, you can bake in your animations and then play that back in Unity. That's pretty cool, where you can have something crumbling and falling apart with realistic physics, but it's just animating. And so that obviously saves a lot of CPU cycles in your game because you're not having to calculate the physics. Wow, a lot of chat has come through since I was chatting away. It is now 8 o'clock. I'm just going to whiz through and see if there's anything from our regular backers, the subscribers to the channel. I won't be answering any more questions as we go through here. Thanks for chatting amongst yourselves as well while I've been rambling on. Can I explain the basic layout for actually moving around in Blender? Not in this stream, but we may cover that in another one. And that's at the beginning of all of our courses as well. All of the courses, by the way, do start from assuming no knowledge. I know some people find that very, oh no, this is really basic and simple. But I try and mix it up a little amongst the various courses as well. You hate the fluffy bunny. I suck at it so bad. Most people with the fluffy bunny, I'll just go to talking head for a moment. So most people with the fluffy bunny hate it because it melts their system. If you go too over the top with particles, especially hair particles, and try and make it a realistic like 200 odd thousand hairs across the bunny, then you're going to end up with a few issues. Even if you've got a powerful computer, you're still going to run into some sort of bottleneck at some point, and then it just takes ages, especially when rendering. If you've got to render 100,000 hairs, it's going to take a lot longer. So maybe cut the hairs back during your prototyping stage if your computer was melting when trying, basically. Right, that's it for this week. I don't have a date for the next one. We're in the holiday season over in the UK, and I think I'm not away as such, but I'm not going to be having good internet next Tuesday. So what I'm going to try and do for you all is sit in the chat and listen to myself. I'm going to try and get something pre-recorded, something interesting. So if you guys have got any ideas for what you'd like to see, I'd love for you guys to reach out. I'll leave the chat there so you guys can see. Or so I can see it later. So stick what you want to hear about next week over in the chat, and I will see you guys at some point in the future, and I'll certainly be in the chat next week with the pre-recorded video. So take care. Thank you for joining me this evening, and I will be back soon. Thank you, everybody. Take care.